Judge mocked the young man in court. Seconds later, he proved to be the brightest lawyer in the room, and what happened in that court in Chicago has changed their career forever. Young, are you sure you are in the right place? Judge Harrison's voice echoed through the room with a tone of misguided disguise. Maybe you should look for the diner of the building. The court exploded in muffled laughs. Marcus Thompson, 24, remained motionless in front of the defense table, its 140 pounds distributed in a suit that clearly cost more than the monthly salary of many gifts. He didn't lower his eyes. It didn't tremble. He just took a deep breath and adjusted his glasses with a disturbing calm. Your Excellency, I am exactly where I need to be, Marcus answered, his clear voice cutting the silence. Representing my client in this case of corporate fraud. Judge Harrison laughed loudly, a cruel sound that made Marcus's blood boil inside. Corporate fraud? Boy, you barely seem old to drive, the more to deal with a case of this size. Who the hell has you hired you? The courtroom was crowded. Journalists, law students, families of the victims of the alleged fraud, all observed with a mixture of morbid curiosity and cruel fun. Prosecutor William Davis, a tall, thin man known for his brutality in the courts, whispered something to his assistant as he looked at Marcus from above. Marcus felt every look of the room burning his skin. The prosecutor's lawyers whispered with each other, some pointing discreetly. His client, Mr. Williams, a 60-year-old businessman accused of diversion of funds, seemed to be regretting his choice. His hands shake slightly as he looked at the young lawyer he had hired. But there was something in Marcus's eyes that no one could decipher, a silent confidence that contrasted with the public humiliation he was suffering. Behind that appearance that everyone thought inadequate, there was a mind that worked as a precision machine. My client hired me because he believes in court, Marcus said, removing a thin leather paste from his briefcase, and I intend to prove it. The judge leaned forward, his eyes shining with malice. At 58, Harrison had built her reputation intimidating inexperienced lawyers. It was known for its public humiliations and its explosive temperament. Listen here, chubby. I've been in this court for 30 years. I've seen hundreds of inexperienced lawyers like you try to impress and fail miserably. Do you really want to embarrass everyone? The laughs intensified. A reporter in the first row held the laughter as he triggered furiously on his cell phone. On social networks, hashtags like Advogado Gordo were already starting to go viral. Marcus closed his eyes for a second and remembered 3 years earlier, when he was in the Harvard Law School library at 3 a.m., studying for his third simultaneous degree. He remembered the laughter of his colleagues when he entered the room. He remembered how he proved everyone who was wrong. Your Excellency, Marcus said, his voice gaining firmness that made the court silence for a moment. Respect his 30 years of experience, but I believe that today the Lord will learn something new. What Judge Harrison did not know was that Marcus Thompson carried something much more powerful than appearances. 3 diplomas summa cum laude, a 165 IQ, and a secret about that specific case that was about to turn that court into his stage of glory. Prosecutor Davis stopped whispering. There was something in Marcus's posture that bothered him, something I could not identify, but that made its survival instinct firing alarms. Marcus opened his folder and removed a document that made his eyes shine. The roll had the timbre of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. While everyone laughed and mocked, he had spent the last 6 months investigating not only his client, but also discovering something much more ominous. Marcus smiled for the first time since he had entered the room, a smile that made the air heavy in expectation, a smile that promised that morning would be remembered for a long time. Your Excellence, he said, holding a document that no one expected, I believe it will be a very interesting morning. The following silence was different from the previous laughs. It was the silence of those who sensed that something was about to change dramatically. If you are enjoying this story of twist and justice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so as not to lose the next amazing cases that we will unravel together. Interesting. Judge Harrison beat the hammer in excessive force, making the whole court jump. The only interesting thing here is how you managed to fool this poor man to hire you. Mr. Williams, no. It's too late to get a real lawyer. Marcus watched his client waver for a moment. Williams looked at him, then to the judge, and Marcus can see the doubt growing in his eyes. It was exactly what Harrison wanted, to destroy his credibility even before the trial began. With due respect, Marcus said, keeping the tone respectful despite the bile that climbed in his throat. My client has already made his choice. Your choice? Harrison laughed theatrically, gesturing to the audience as an actor. Look at him. This boy can barely see his own feet. How will you see the nuances of a complex federal case? The audience exploded in laughs. A woman in the third row blatantly pointed out as she whispered something to her friend. The journalists typed furiously, some already posting photos with cruel subtitles. Marcus felt his cheeks burn. but forced himself to stay still. I had long learned that it reacts emotionally only fed predators like Harrison. Instead, he discreetly opened his folder and took a look at the SEC document. The words, "Confidential Investigation," Judge Harrison seemed to pulse the page. Prosecutor Davis got up, realizing an opportunity. "Your Excellence, if you allow me, share your concerns. This case involves millions of dollars and dozens of families harmed. Perhaps it would be prudent." "Exactly," Harrison beat his fist on the table. "We're talking about corporate fraud, not a traffic case. Gordino, have you defended any criminal case before?" "Yes, Your Excellence. 15 cases, all with acquittal." Marcus's answer was firm, but he saw Harrison ignore her completely. 15 cases of what? Fight in McDonald's? The room roared with laughter again. "Listen well, boy. You're about to face William Davis, one of the state's most competent promoters. He will destroy you." Davis smiled with false modesty, clearly savoring the moment. He had gained 47 of the last 50 cases, and his relentless reputation was well known. He looked at Marcus as a predator observes a wounded prey. Marcus took a deep breath and remembered the telephone conversation he had had 3 days earlier. An anonymous female voice had called your office at 11 p.m. "Do you really want to defend Williams? Because I have information that will change everything about this case." "Your Excellency," Marcus said, keeping the SEC document and removing another roll. "Can I proceed with my opening arguments?" Harrison studied him for a moment with contempt. "You may try, but I'll interrupt every time you speak a nonsense, and I'm sure it will be often." Marcus positioned himself before the jury. 12 people who watched him with a mixture of piety and curiosity. He could read his thoughts. How will this chubby boy defend someone? "Ladies and lords of the jury," Marcus began, his voice gaining an authority that surprised himself to himself. "In the coming days you will hear many accusations about my client. They will hear about alleged funds deviations, counterfeit documents, about an elaborate conspiracy." Harrison rolled his eyes dramatically. "Back to the point, chubby." Public humiliation continued, but something had changed in Marcus's posture. He was no longer defending himself. "I was attacking. But what you won't hear from the prosecution," Marcus continued, ignoring Harrison completely, "it's about the true criminals in this case. Powerful people who manipulated evidence, who bought witnesses, who turned an innocent man into a scapegoat." Davis frowned. There was something in the tone of Marcus that bothered him. The young lawyer spoke like someone who knew something others didn't know. "Objection!" Davis got up. "The lawyer is making unfounded accusations." "Case," Harrison said quickly. "Mr. Thompson, if I can call him that, keep up with the facts." Marcus smiled slightly. "Of course you. Facts are exactly what I have." He returned to his table and took a third folder, which marked with red paint. Inside there were photographs, bank statements, and something that would make Harrison question every decision he had made in the last 5 years. "What the court doesn't know," Marcus said, his low but penetrating voice, "is that this case is much larger than it seems, and some people in this room have much more to lose than they think." Harrison stopped smiling. There was something in Marcus's eyes that made him uncomfortable for the first time in years, a confidence that made no sense coming from an inexperienced young lawyer being publicly humiliated. Marcus closed the red paste and looked straight at Harrison. For a second his eyes met, and the judge saw something that made him swallow hard. What Harrison didn't know was that Marcus had spent the last this months investigating not only the case of Williams, but also discovering a chain of corruption that reached the highest levels of the Chicago judiciary. That night, Marcus was in his small office 3 blocks from the court, surrounded by piles of documents and 4 linked monitors. The cold pizza next to the keyboard had been untouched for hours. At 2:47 a.m., his eyes burned, but his mind worked 1,000 per hour. "Did you find something?" The female voice came from the phone on the Vive. It was Sarah Chen, private researcher at Securities and Exchange Commission and the woman who had linked anonymously 3 days earlier. "More than we imagined," Marcus murmured, typing access codes in a federal database. "Harrison is not just corrupt. It is the epicenter of an operation that involves at least 12 cases in the last 5 years. Sarah had become her secret ally after discovering that Marcus was the only brave lawyer to accept the Williams case, knowing it was a trap. Everyone had refused, not out of incompetence but because they knew the system was addicted. "The bank statements you sent me are devastating," Sarah said. "Harrison received $340,000 in ghost transfers during the period when Williams allegedly committed the fraud." Marcus first smiled in 12 hours. For years being humiliated by his weight, he had developed a unique ability to observe everything while everyone ignored him. No one paid attention to the chubby lawyer so he could investigate freely. "There is more," Marcus said, opening a digital folder marked as bomb. "Williams never committed any fraud. It was used as orange while Harrison and Davis diverted funds from a charity for children with cancer. The silence across the line lasted long seconds. Jesus, Marcus. Are you sure? I have 847 evidence pages, bank transfers, encrypted emails, even conversation recordings. Marcus leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of the discovery. Davis is not just the prosecutor, he is the right arm of the operation. The next morning, Marcus arrived at court with a different energy. 3 hours of sleep, but his eyes shone with a determination that drew attention even the security guards. He now carried an aluminum briefcase, not leather like the day before. Look who came back, Harrison announced when Marcus entered the room. The chubby brought a new briefcase. How about, guys? They bet how long until he gave up? The laughs echoed again, but this time Marcus didn't care. He had spent the whole night preparing for this moment. Williams approached him, clearly nervous. Marcus, my son, perhaps we should consider an agreement. This judge clearly has something against you. Mr. Williams, Marcus said softly, organizing his new documents. Trust me for a few more hours. What is about to happen will surprise everyone in this room. Davis watched Marcus with growing discomfort. There was something different in the young lawyer today. Yesterday, he just seemed determined. Today, it seemed dangerous. Your Excellency, Marcus got up. I would like to call my first witness. Harrison laughed loudly. Your first witness? Fat, you barely managed to finish your opening arguments yesterday without stuttering. The defense calls Sarah Chen, senior researcher at Securities and Exchange Commission. The silence that followed was absolute. Davis paled instantly. Harrison stopped smiling for the first time in 2 days. Sarah entered the room with a laptop, 2 flash drives, and a folder that made Davis start to sweat visibly. She was a 35-year-old Asian woman, known in Chicago for destroying financial corruption schemes. Objection! Davis jumped out of the chair. This witness was not listed. Actually, it was, Marcus said, delivering a document to the clerk. Emergency Protocol 72 hours, according to Federal Code 1247B. When there is a suspicion of judicial corruption, new elements can be presented. Harrison looked at the document like a poisonous snake. Her hands trembled almost imperceptibly as she read. Marcus observed their reaction and knew that their strategy was working perfectly. For months being underestimated and humiliated, he had secretly built the most solid case of his career. Your Excellency, Marcus said. His voice now carried an authority that made the entire court silence. Miss Chen has evidence that will radically change this judgment. Sarah positioned himself in the witness's tribune and looked straight at Harrison. Your Excellence has been investigating a corruption network for 6 months that involves diversion of federal funds, evidence manipulation, and bribery from civil servants. Harrison's face was now completely white. Davis had sat heavily as if her legs had given up. Marcus opened his aluminum briefcase and removed a tablet. On the screen, a paused audio recording expected to be played. A recording with Harrison's unmistakable voice negotiating bribes. What no one in this room knew in this room, Marcus said, looking straight at Harrison with a smile that promised justice, is that the true criminal was presiding over this judgment since day one. Before we went on, Sarah said, connecting her laptop to the court sound system, I would like everyone to hear this. Marcus pressed play on the tablet. Harrison's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. Davis, I need another $50,000 transferred to the Cayman Islands account until Friday. The Hope Foundation will never find that the money of children with cancer is financing our retirement. The court exploded. Reporters jumped from the chairs, cameras fired, and a shock murmuring traveled each row. Harrison was white as paper, her hands shaking violently as she tried to turn off the sound system. Stop this recording, Harrison shouted, hitting the hammer desperately. This is inadmissible. Illegal evidence. Marcus got up slowly, his presence now dominating the room. In fact, Your Excellence, all these recordings were legally obtained through federal warrants. Warrants that I helped to write myself. Davis tried to run towards the exit, but 2 federal agents that Marcus had noticed discreetly blocking their way. The trap had been thoroughly planned. Who the hell are you? Harrison whispered, her arrogance evaporating like smoke. Marcus smiled and removed a wallet from his briefcase. Marcus Thompson, summa cum laude in law by Harvard, administration by Wharton, and computer science by MIT. I am also a special FBI consultant for white-collar crimes for 3 years. The silence was deafening. The same man Harrison had called chubby and publicly humiliated was, in fact, one of the most brilliant investigators in the country. Sarah continued the presentation, projecting bank statements on the screen. Over the past 5 years, Judge Harrison has deflected $2.3 million from charity foundations. Davis has facilitated Operation Falsifying Evidence in 23 cases, turning innocents into scapegoats. Williams looked at Marcus with tears in his eyes, finally understanding why he had hired the inexperienced lawyer. Marcus had approached him strategically, knowing that he was innocent and that the case would be the perfect bait to catch the true criminals. Public humiliations were part of their strategy, Marcus explained to the fascinated court. The more ridiculous I looked, the less attention they would pay what I was really doing. While Harrison called me fat and incompetent, I was collecting evidence that would destroy her career. Davis tried one last card. This is a blow, a conspiracy against... Against whom? Marcus interrupted, his sharp voice like a blade. Against criminals who stole money intended to save children with cancer? Against a corrupt system that turns innocents into guilty? Marcus turned to Harrison, who now seemed to have aged 10 years in 10 minutes. You remember yesterday when I said I couldn't see the nuances of a federal case? Well, I saw perfectly. I saw that you and Davis were using this court as a facade for a criminal operation. The young lawyer who had been ridiculed now walking around the room with the authority of a general, each step calculated, each word chosen for maximum impact. Sarah designed the last evidence. Harrison and Davis photographs on a luxury yacht, drinking champagne as they reviewed documents with the Hope Foundation logo. Taken 3 days after you denied treatment for 40 children for lack of funds. Harrison collapsed in his chair, covering his face with his hands. The man who had spent 2 days humiliating Marcus was now being publicly destroyed, his 30-year reputation evaporating in real time. Marcus approached the judge's table, looking straight into the eyes of the man who had called him chubby and incompetent. Your Excellence, who is ashamed now? The federal agents approached Harrison with handcuffs. Davis was already being escorted out, her legs shaking so much that she could barely walk. Marcus returned to his table where Williams was waiting for him with a smile of admiration and relief. All accusations against my client are withdrawn, Marcus announced to the shock room, and a complete federal investigation will be opened against all cases chaired by Harrison in the last 5 years. The camera's flash illuminated Marcus's face as he calmly organized his documents. The same man who had entered the court being ridiculed now came out as the hero who had exposed one of Chicago's largest judicial corruption networks. While Harrison was taken handcuffed by the agents, he looked at Marcus a last time. The young, fat, and incompetent lawyer had proved to be the most dangerous enemy he could have faced. Marcus smiled and waved discreetly, as well as saying goodbye to an old acquaintance. Justice had been served, and served cold. 6 months later, Marcus was on the cover of Time magazine with the title, The Young Genius Who Overthrew Corruption in Chicago. The court where he had been humiliated now displayed a sign, Room Marcus Thompson, dedicated to judicial transparency. Harrison had been sentenced to 25 years in federal arrest. Davis took 18 years. Both lost their licenses, their fortunes were confiscated, and now shared a cell into a maximum security penitentiary. The man who had called Marcus chubby now spent his days cleaning the prison floor, dreaming of the times when he had power. Harrison's fall had been devastating and very public. His wife asked for divorce on the second day of trial and moved to another state with their children, who changed their surname to escape the shame. Its mansion of $3 million was auctioned to pay compensation to the victims. The judge who once mocked Marcus's appearance now wore orange uniform and ate in plastic trays. Davis, in turn, had lost not only his career but also family and friends. His wife discovered the deviations through Marcus's investigation and abandoned him, taking his 2 young children. The prosecutor, who was untouchable, now shared the arrest bathroom with criminals that he himself had unjustly condemned. Mr. Thompson, CNN reporter asked during a live interview, how do you feel knowing that your investigation resulted in the revision of 89 cases and the release of 34 innocents? Marcus, now 25 years old and director of the FBI's new Judicial Integrity Division, smiled with the same calm that had shown in that court. I feel grateful to have had the opportunity to prove that justice has no appearance. It has character. Marcus's office in Washington, D.C., received dozens of daily letters from people who had suffered weight discrimination. He had involuntarily become the symbol that competence has no size. His motivational lectures exhausted auditoriums in minutes, and universities around the world fought to have him as the main speaker. Marcus's story had spread internationally. Documentaries were produced, books were written, and a Netflix series based on their life was in production. He had refused dozens of millionaire offers to tell his story, preferring to invest every penny in social causes. Williams, completely acquitted and with his restored company, had become the main financier of a foundation that Marcus created, Lawyers Against Prejudice. The organization offered free legal representation for discrimination victims and had already won 127 cases in 2 years, recovering millions in compensation. Marcus saved me from 20 years in prison, Williams said in an interview with ABC News, tears running on his face. But more than that, he showed that true greatness comes from within, not how you look out. He turned my gratitude into a life mission. Williams' company now exclusively employed people who had suffered some kind of discrimination, former convicts, people with disabilities, victims of racial or heavy prejudice. Everyone found a second chance there. The company has become a world model of genuine inclusion. Sarah Chen had been promoted to the head of the SEC Anti-Corruption Division, and she and Marcus were now leading a federal task force that had already exposed similar schemes in 7 different states. Together, they recovered more than $50 million stolen from charity foundations, returning hope to thousands of families. The case Marcus Thompson had permanently changed the American judicial system. A new federal protocol forced all judicial sessions, and an anonymous complaint system allowed lawyers to report inadequate judges without fear of retaliation. 37 corrupt judges had already been dismissed using the Thompson Protocol. In Marcus's office, now occupying 3 floors of a skyscraper in downtown Chicago, there was a framed photo on the wall, he in court, being humiliated by Harrison, with his calm and determined expression. Below, a sign said, "Remember, they underestimated you once." Next to this photo, dozens of others showed Marcus with presser teeth, prime ministers, activists, and victims of discrimination that he had helped. Each photo told a story of restored hope. During a lecture at Harvard, Marcus told his story to 500 law students. The audience was mesmerized, some tears in his eyes as he imagined the humiliation he had faced. The auditorium was so quiet that a needle could be heard. When Judge Harrison called me chubby and said I should look for the cafeteria, I could have given up. I could have believed he was right, Marcus said, walking down the stage with the confidence of those who had found his life purpose. One student lifted his hand, his voice shaking with emotion. "How did you get calm throughout that humiliation?" Marcus smiled and discreetly played his belly, which was still there, and that he had learned to accept as part of who he was. "Because I knew something he didn't know. I knew my value didn't depend on his approval, and that the best revenge is not to become the same as his oppressors. It is to become so great that they become irrelevant." The audience exploded in applause that lasted 5 minutes. Students got up, teachers cried, and many shouted words of encouragement. "Do you know what Harrison told me on the last day of the trial?" Marcus continued when the silence returned. He said, "Thompson, you destroyed me." And I answered, "No, you have destroyed yourself." A plus-size student in the first row lifted his hand. "Mr. Thompson, how can I have the same confidence you have?" Marcus descended from the stage and approached her. "You already have that confidence. She's just waiting for you to stop asking permission to shine." At his table, Marcus kept a letter he received every week. It was from a 12-year-old child named Tommy, who suffered bullying at school because of weight. "Mr. Marcus," said the last letter, "thanks for showing me that being different can be my superpower. I want to be a lawyer like you when you grow up." Marcus had framed this letter alongside his 3 diplomas, the Lawyer of the Year prize he had received from the American Bar Association, and a photograph with the U.S. President, who had awarded him for his exceptional services to the American courts. Tommy was not the only one. Marcus received letters from children from all over the world. An 8-year-old girl from Japan sent his drawings as a superhero. A 15-year-old boy from Brazil created a club at school called Futuros Marcus Thompson. Last month, Marcus had received 347 requests for help from victims of discrimination. His office was now employed 23 lawyers specializing in prejudice cases, and everyone worked for bono for those who could not afford it. They had become known as Marcus's Army. During an international press conference, a French journalist asked, "Mr. Thompson, do you still face discrimination because of weight?" Marcus laughed genuinely, a sound that echoed through the hall. "Of course, yes. The difference is that now I know that when someone judges me for their appearance, they are giving me a strategic advantage." Undeslating Marcus Thompson has become a very expensive mistake to make. The phrase became international meme. T-shirts with "Don't underestimate to Marcus Thompson" were sold in 15 countries, with all income reversed to their foundation. A BBC documentary showed how Marcus's history inspired movements against discrimination in 23 countries. In France, chubby students created the Marcus movement. In Brazil, plus-size lawyers founded the Thompson Institute. In Australia, a law against gordophobia was nicknamed Marcus Law. At the end of that afternoon, Marcus was driving in front of the court where everything had started. For a moment he stopped and observed the entrance where he had been ridiculed. Now young lawyers came in and out confidently, knowing that corruption had been eliminated and would have righteous judgments. A gold plaque at the court entrance caught his attention. "In memory of all the innocent convicted of judicial corruption, may their voices never be forgotten." Below, in smaller letters, Research led by Marcus Thompson, FBI. Next to the sign, a statue had been erected, Marcus holding the balance of justice, with the inscription, "Justice has no appearance, has character." Children played around the statue, and a chubby girl posed for photos with her parents smiling proudly. Your cell phone rang. It was another case. A young black engineer was being discriminated against in a large technology company. "I'll be there in an hour," Marcus said, turning on the car. "And bring all the evidence you have. Let's do justice." While driving, Marcus reflected on how his life had changed. Not for having lost weight, or for became more acceptable. He was still fat, still faced judging looks, still listened to whispered comments. But now he knew something fundamental. His dignity had never depended on the opinion of others. Harrison had tried to destroy him using his weight as a weapon, but Marcus had turned this attempt at humiliation into the strength that boosted him to expose one of the largest corruption networks in Chicago's history, forever changing the American judiciary. The truth that Marcus had learned, and now taught for thousands of people around the world, was simple but powerful. When someone tries to diminish him for his appearance, they are revealing their own limitations, not their own. 3 years after the trial, Marcus received a letter from the prison. It was from Harrison. "Thompson, you were right about everything. I was the problem, not you. Thanks for stopping me before I destroyed more innocent lives. You're a better man than I ever went." Marcus read the letter twice, smiled sadly, and filed it. Even their enemies eventually recognized the truth. Davis had also sent a letter, asking for forgiveness and admitting that he always knew that Marcus was brilliant, but that prejudice blinded him. "You taught me that the size of character is much more important than body size," he wrote. And in that court years earlier, when Harrison laughed at him for the last time, Marcus already knew he had won. Because the biggest victory was not to prove that Harrison was wrong about his skills. It was proving that Harrison was wrong about her value as a human being. Justice had been served, cold and complete, and Marcus Thompson, the chubby who should look for the cafeteria, had become the man who turned that court into the most in the country and inspired an entire generation to fight against prejudice. Today, when young lawyers face discrimination anywhere in the world, they whisper with each other as a mantra, "Remember Marcus Thompson. Remember that their appearance may be their secret weapon, not their weakness." And in Chicago, every time someone is judged by appearance instead of character, the places say, "Be careful. You may be underestimating the next Marcus Thompson." If you have been inspired by this incredible story of overcoming injustice, do not forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more cases that prove that dignity and character always overcome prejudice and ignorance.